Colorism is a form of discrimination against darker skin tones. It's an intra-racial issue that the Black community has debated for centuries. In this episode of Crossing Over Black Greek Life, join me as I explore if colorism has been a problem in these organizations. Have you ever been told you weren't good enough? In a sense, colorism and texturism do that, and it's taught at a young age.
Dealing with discrimination of light-skinned Blacks versus dark-skinned Blacks.
Not only do I have to deal with what goes on, the racism from ignorant people who are of other races, you have to deal with the poor mindsets of people who are African American.
What's good hair, what's bad hair, and why the term good and bad?
Well, the straighter the better, so to say.
Is that what you think?
No, I don't think so personally.
Why
but
not?
That's what we've been programmed to think.
We've debated these topics for centuries. Who's prettier, who's smarter, who's better? But the bottom line is, it hurts everyone.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind being their color. I feel like I'm tortured in a way because of my daily issues of what I'm going through and what I'm trying to get at in life.
Since I was a girl, I've heard rumors about colorism and texturism seeping its way into Black Greek life. I could never understand if it was fact or fiction. But before I pick apart this debate, I wanted to make sure I understood the origin of colorism. Why do we carry this burden around in the first place? So can you define what colorism is?
Yeah, so colorism is discrimination that occurs based upon one's skin tone, and it happens within a particular racial group. And so colorism can occur across groups, or it can occur within a group. So for example, you could be someone who identifies as Black, and you could discriminate against folks who are darker skinned relative to folks who are lighter skinned.
Does it only exist in communities of color?
So definitely in communities of color. Some might argue that it exists within the dominant racial group in America, which is white people, but it's not something that's necessarily unique to Black people.
So the origin for African Americans is pretty straightforward. It goes all the way back to slavery. Different skin tones started popping up in this time, and it complicated the Black community's relationship with itself, especially in places like Louisiana, where there was a large mixed-race population. But how does that affect organizations like Black Greek Life? Is there any evidence showing that for Black people, it was difficult to get into schools or, say, fraternities if their skin color wasn't acceptable?
I came across a book that Henry Louis Gates wrote, and the book was published in the mid-1990s, but he was in part reflecting on his experience as a student at Yale University, I believe in the late 1960s. And he talked about going to a party, and when he was heading into the party, there was a paper bag on the door, and if you were darker than the paper bag, you couldn't go to the party.
Here's where it gets kind of murky. There are several accounts of people saying they've experienced exactly what Lori is describing. Audrey Kerr, a professor who specializes in functional intersectionality, says sororities at Howard University use things like the paper bag test to determine admission. Those stories are even used in the plot of the Spike Lee movie School Days. But on the other side of that debate, some say there wasn't much evidence to support these claims at all.
One of the major criticisms that Black fraternities and sororities have faced over time is elitism. And a lot of that was manifested in the stories about the brown paper bag test, meaning people were denied membership in organizations if their skin was darker than a brown paper bag. There are anecdotal stories about this happening and people have written about it, but there's really some conflict in terms of the research.
Colorism and elitism are complicated topics, so I thought I'd meet with our expert in person for this one.
As somebody who's been to a lot of archives and looked at archival footage, I've seen people much darker than me in those groups in the 1930s and 40s. So I think in pockets that happened, but in terms of that being a unilateral motive for those organizations, I mean, I can think about members of Alpha Phi Alpha that are really dark, and that was at the very beginning.
But for those organizations that did have those issues, I mean, were they primarily in the South? Were they in the North?
Yeah, it's a range of places. I mean, I've heard stories about some of the colorism at a place like Howard, where that would happen. That's DC, and people decide whether DC is the South or not. They go back and forth. So just in different places. But you didn't have as much of that later on, because when the HBCUs in the South became accredited in the 1940s and 1950s, They were really just trying to add members.
Just limited to a couple places.
Yeah, it's just, I think, just very limited. Like I said, I personally think a lot has been made of that. Probably too much has been made of it.
Because I think that was a main plot in School Days.
Yeah, that was one of the issues in terms of colorism. And so, like I said, there was issues different places, but it could have been an issue who got certain roles in the church. I mean, colorism played a role a lot of places in how people moved in society. They were able to do certain things. They saw that.
So that's it. Both points exist somewhere within the truth. But isn't it a relief to know that we've grown past paper bag tests and skin color admissions? I'm relieved. And I'm also hopeful. And I think you should be too. This episode is part of a special series called Crossing Over Black Greek Life. We've got 2 more episodes airing this month on SWI.
Look forward to it. Great job. Thank you very much.